They seem to want to fight it because of the unknown, so you have to try to educate them, let them know how it's going to work, let them know that when there are going to be problems, that you are willing to work with them, not fight them, not say it has to be this way, but kind of look at various options, think outside of that box a little bit to make things work. Some of the concerns that a lot of people have with the breakfast in the classroom is it's going to be a big mess, I'm going to have stuff all over my room, there's going to be trash. I will say that most school districts that I have spoken to that have done breakfast in the classroom, this has not been the problem that they expected it to be. It's actually worked well. They've been able to come in, get their breakfast when they come into the classroom. They eat it while the teachers are taking roll, collecting papers that may be brought in from home, kind of doing those morning rituals that they do each morning in the classroom. As far as the mess goes, that's one of the things you would have to work with your custodial staff on. And there's several ways of dealing with that. One is that trash bags could be provided for each classroom. I went to visit a school just about maybe 2 months ago, and they actually had trash cans that were positioned in the walkways or the hallways throughout the school, that when each class finished, they just dumped their trash in those receptacles. And that worked out really well for them. But again, that's something you have to work with your custodial department. Each school has a different layout, so you have to figure out what works best for that particular school. And then how does this breakfast get there? What do I have to do to get it to them? There's different ways of doing that. One school that I went to and visited, they actually pre-packaged the number of breakfasts they needed for each classroom, so when the kids got there, the cafeteria staff delivered those breakfasts to the classroom and then later came back and picked up what was left and then handled it properly according to what the food item may have been. Accountability, that sometimes is another issue, is how am I going to properly account for each student that got fed? The rosters is usually a good way. There's also some schools do a point of sale system. They either do a wireless system, which works well in some schools, where other schools it does not work well. It depends on, again, the layout of the school and how that works. Some people just do a drop in various places in the school where they can collect accountability that way. And then again, it's the buy-in from the principals. And there's been several principals out there that were totally against it. Once they tried it, they were just absolutely amazed at how well the program worked in the classroom, how they had less kids going to the clinic because they had upset stomachs, the improved test scores, increased behavioral, or actually decreased behavioral problems, and increased better attendance and kids doing better in the classrooms, and test scores increasing as well. So there are definitely many operational challenges that can occur, but in most cases they are worked out, they're worked through, and everybody works together as a team. It cannot be a one-man team. It definitely needs to be a collaborative effort with everybody, the teachers, the principal, the custodians, and the cafeterias.
Thank you, Debbie. You can put that mic over there. So now we'll pass it over to this table. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here to be able to talk about school breakfast and how important it is to our children of Virginia. And I'm Catherine Grimes, the State Director for School Nutrition, and oversee all the school reimbursement, school breakfast programs, school lunch programs, provide the guidance, the policies, the direction, help them understand what the USDA regulations are. But it's really, really great to be able to promote breakfast, because we know, as LaTonya said, that many of our children do not get breakfast at home. Many of them come to school hungry. Schools do not have a pre-established breakfast period. And consequently, you know, if there's no time to go to the cafeteria, then the child doesn't eat. So breakfast in the classroom or any other alternative way of offering breakfast really has been a plus. And we have many, many schools within Virginia that are already doing this. And, you know, we applaud them because they have seen great success and great increases in participation. One thing I want to make sure everybody's aware of is that even though we talk about low-income children, school meal programs are available to all students. And that seems to be a misconception. It's not just for those kids who are on free or reduced price meals, it's for everybody, including the paying students. When we do breakfast in the classroom, we tend to see an increase in not just those eligible for free and reduced price meals, but more importantly, the students that have to pay for their meals that don't normally take advantage of breakfast, which helps boost participation, helps increase reimbursement, helps bring about the camaraderie in the classroom and the dispelling of the disparity between categories of kids. So it's really important to look at that in the full context, that providing meals for students is important for all students, not just low-income students. While we recognize that low income may be more needy and may have other challenges in their life, paying students are just as important. So that's an important point to make. The other thing I'd like to say is that in Virginia, we have, over the last 10 years, really seen a dramatic increase in breakfast participation. We have a breakfast incentive funding program that started in under the Warner administration, where we are actually receiving 22 cents for every meal, breakfast meal, over and above the base year of 2003-04 school year. And that has challenged schools to really increase their participation because it gave them additional funding and more money, which was state funds, not federal funds, to help expand their breakfast program and offer breakfast in a different manner. We have seen many challenges in the last couple of years with all the changes to the new regulations. This coming year, some new pieces of the regulation go into effect that may pose a little bit of additional challenges, particularly the sodium component. But we know that our school nutrition directors and the staff in the schools are up to the challenge and have done an outstanding job, so we know we're going to be successful. The other important thing, I think, is that we at the Department of Ed really work closely with school divisions to help provide technical assistance and guidance on how schools can do things. So if a school is considering to do breakfast in the classroom or considering now community eligibility provisions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon, but that's an opportunity for offering meals at no cost to all students without having to collect meal applications. And that really works very well with breakfast in the classroom or grab and go or kiosks, so that there is no collection of money. The critical thing, though, there's still that accountability piece. So USDA will not allow you to claim reimbursement for more than one meal for each student. So even though you may not be collecting money and you may not be counted by category of free, reduced, or paid, schools still have to count heads, and you can't give 2 meals to Johnny because he's hungrier than Billy. So it's important that school nutrition directors and the staff in the schools understand that, and even though they may have extra meals sitting there on the table, they can't just give additional meals to students. You could, but you would not get reimbursed for that additional meal to the students. So I think I'll end there, and then we'll ask questions as we go along. So I'll turn it over to Meg.
Good morning. I'm Meg Gruber, president of Virginia Education Association, and for 32 years I taught high school science in Prince William County. So I'm really excited about this program and the ability to bring it in, because I know from my own personal experience what it's like to have a child, in the morning who hasn't had breakfast or hasn't eaten appropriately. I was just sitting here thinking about trying to remember back in the Stone Age when I was a student, what did I eat for breakfast? And I think in a lot of cases, because I'm not a morning person, and I think a lot of my students weren't morning people, they didn't eat breakfast. They got up in time to dress and run and, get their ride or catch the bus. And if they're eating anything, they're grabbing a couple of cookies or Pop-Tarts or something that, is going to spike their blood sugar, so that partway through class all they want to do is go to sleep. And not because I was boring, but as they claim. But I think it's really essential, that as many students as we can And I think, again, we're worried obviously about those that, come from home lives where they don't have access to food. But I think we have a tremendous number of students who have access to food that just aren't getting it. For whatever reason, they don't want to, they get up too late, so I think this has a great opportunity to make sure all of our children are starting their day right. Like Jim said, you don't have to listen to your mother. You've got to start with that good breakfast. I think also from an academic standpoint, those of us that are in the classrooms, and I know we have a number of our VEA members, our local association leaders here, children react to hunger differently. Some of them get lethargic, and then there's the ones that get really, for lack of a better term, crazy. That to try to keep their energy level up, they just can't sit still. They're, bouncing off the walls. They're certainly not paying attention. I mean, if your basic needs aren't being met, just think about how hard it would be to be paying attention to anything, let alone something that could be challenging to you. So I'm really excited to be part of this partnership because we definitely want all our children to be able to be successful, and we definitely want them to be able to do the best they can do, and you can't do the best that you can do when you're sitting there hungry, hurting, and just don't know, and are too worried about, am I going to make it to lunch okay? Or do I need to leave class? Do I need to say I don't feel well? Because maybe I know the nurse keeps some snacks in her office, which many of them do. And so they're missing class time because they're hungry. So I hope that all of you will wholeheartedly embrace this program.
Give our panelists a round of applause. So if anyone has questions, be sure to write it on your note card, and Annalise and Yang are walking around to collect them, but I'll go ahead and ask a few questions while we wait. And feel free, anyone who has an answer, to jump in. So what is the best way for your local partners to advocate for implementation of breakfast in the classroom?
I think one of the important things is that the school-based people have to buy into it. That's the most important success factor. Our school nutrition folks are all on board. They would be more than happy if they had willing principals to say, great, we'll try it. I just met with our new state superintendent, and we talked at length about breakfast, and he is on board. He is more than happy to encourage schools, principals, and superintendents to really try and buy into breakfast in the classroom. So I think we'll see some things coming out at the highest level. And of course, we all know that the governor and the first lady are very much involved in that as well. But I think the partners, in my assessment, I think if partners work through the Department of Ed to get the information out to the principals and to the teachers and to the superintendents, it'll generally will be more accepted than having it come to them from an outside entity. So, we're here to help, so please take advantage of that.
The thing that I'd like to add from the teacher's perspective and the support professional's perspective is it's really important from day one to make sure that everybody's involved in the discussions in how to put the program together, about how do we do this. And I think, and the other thing is to keep the focus on what you want your outcome to be. You want your outcome to be healthier children who are more successful. And I think we as people get more, I think as Debbie said earlier, get more tied up in, oh, well, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. So maybe we better not try it. This is, to me, this is too important for our kids. That one's not working. I'll pop up my teacher voice. But I think it's really too important for our kids to not let fears and what could happen and how do we handle the trash and from a teacher aspect, oh, maybe I'll lose 5 minutes of my class period. But I look at that as saying, but if they're not hungry anymore and they're better attentive, I'll get more out of the 40 minutes I have left than an entire 45 when they're not attentive. And I think we really, really have to work at, not letting the obstacles hold us back. And if things go wrong at first, oh well, we have an opportunity to make corrections. We can't just let it hold us back.
One thing I want to add to that as well is you want to sometimes pick that school that those teachers, the principal, are all going to work together, because once you've sold it to one, that word travels throughout the district, and then everybody's calling and everyone's asking to go on. So you really want to pick that one school that is, or maybe several schools that are going to really embrace that idea and are willing to work out those kinks in their school to help make it better for everyone.
Thank you. And here's a question from out there. So LaTonya mentioned that increased participation means increase in federal funding for the state. Could someone explain what that means for school districts and how the additional funding can be used?
Schools, can you hear me in the back? Okay, schools are reimbursed based on the number of meals they are served. So while we say there'll be increased federal funds for the state, the misconception there is that the money doesn't go to the state as a one lump sum amount. The only way a school earns federal funds is through the number of meals they serve. So they would be claiming reimbursement for each individual meal, and that would increase their amount of reimbursement. So the funds would go directly to the school nutrition program to support the school nutrition breakfast and lunch programs. So, and a lot of people, what I hear frequently is the state will get more funds, and the misconception that comes across in my head anyway is, okay, the government is now going to give Virginia this new pot of money that people can tap into for breakfast. That's not true. There is no additional money other than the federal reimbursement. And meals are reimbursed at 3 different rates: the rate for free meals, the rate for reduced price meals, and the rate for paid meals. So all children who eat, the school nutrition department gets reimbursement for. It's just depending on which level the student is as to what amount of reimbursement. So the funds would directly impact and directly support the increased number of meals served. And what we have found is that by increasing your breakfast participation, you are able to significantly increase your reimbursement, but your costs are not quite as high as you would if you're doing lunch. So you end up really being in a good position to expand breakfast and to provide additional or different items or more variety.
Okay, and here's another question from the audience. What happens with the waste of the breakfast when if the kids do not want the breakfast that is being provided from the program? Are more students not eating, or is there any food being wasted?
There is some waste. Pretty much you're going to have to work through that to minimize the waste. In the beginning, there would be a higher amount of waste, and as you come to find out how many students in each class are eating on a regular basis, then that is the amount of breakfast that you will send to each school. However, if a student, let's say milk was sent to the classroom and they did not consume the milk, you would need to discard that milk because of food safety reasons. You would not want to keep that. Things like fresh fruit, those could possibly be reserved. You would just take them back, you would rewash them, and you could reuse that again. But anything that's perishable, yes, would have to be discarded and would not be able to be reused. So there is some waste there, but that minimizes as time goes on and you figure out how many kids are actually eating in each classroom. So it is a guessing game at first, but that waste does decrease as time goes on.
Let me just add to that. And it also has to do with how the menu planner plans the menu and what options are available to the students. Obviously, if there are unpopular items, that's not an item you would be frequently serving for breakfast compared to something that the kids always eat. But what we see statewide for those that have implemented breakfast in the classroom is that after the first initial rocky road starts, we see really minimal waste because the kids do eat their breakfast, and if they're in an environment where everybody's eating at the same time and everybody has the same meals available to them, we don't see a large amount of waste.
Thank you, and that's a good segue, bringing up the menus into some other questions. So does implementing breakfast in the classroom mean changing the current breakfast menu? And I'm going to combine that with what models of breakfast in the classroom or grab-and-go breakfast have school districts implemented in Virginia?
I think Debbie can add to this, but the USDA requirements for school breakfast are the same regardless of where it's served. So that you still have to meet the standards that USDA has established for meal components. Every breakfast has to offer every student a milk, a grain, and a fruit. Every student must take a fruit for breakfast beginning this year. And then there are various options that could go along with that. So what we have seen in many cases, some schools do just cold breakfasts, particularly if they're delivering to the classroom and they're kind of a grab-and-go box breakfast or bag breakfast. Others, however, have done hot breakfast meals. So it really depends on the creativity of the school nutrition director as how they plan their menu. But the key is that regardless of how the menu is planned, it has to meet the nutrition standards and the nutrition requirements of the meal pattern that USDA has established.
And I think the other part of that question was the means on how to serve breakfast for the classroom. Some are doing a grab-and-go where they will pick it up at one location in the school, whether it be the cafeteria or whether it's actually kiosks that are set up throughout the school that are more convenient for the students to get to. And then they take the breakfast to their classroom and consume their breakfast. Other ways are actually where the cafeteria has pre-packaged for each classroom and they actually deliver the meals to each classroom. So there are several ways out there. So there is the grab and go from the cafeteria, there's kiosks set up throughout the school, and then there's meals that are actually delivered to the classroom for each classroom based on the number of students.
I'm going to save the question on the grant logistics for a little bit later. There's going to be someone walking through the grant in a little more detail. Where are some of the places that schools have implemented the program in Virginia?
Okay, so for the school nutrition directors that are in the audience, how many of you are doing breakfast in the classroom? Okay, so we have Henry County, Richmond City, Henrico County, Chesterfield, Lynchburg. We have some in Southwest Virginia, Washington County. So we have a fairly large number that are doing breakfast in the classroom or some alternative to cafeteria breakfast. And we've seen and heard from them that they have been very successful. Again, there's some, little bits of logistics to work out, but once all those are worked out, and like Debbie said, once you have one principal and one teacher that love it, it's contagious and the rest of the school wants to implement it. So it really is a very successful program, and the bottom line is it meets the needs of our children. So, what we haven't really studied exactly is the actual effect of having breakfast in the classroom to Virginia children. We have lots of anecdotal information, we have lots of research studies, but in Virginia we have not done any of those studies that we may be doing in the near future.
So we've heard the data that sort of breakfast participation is roughly half of lunch participation. So I'm going to combine two questions here. What are some barriers to school breakfast participation? And are the school districts that have already implemented breakfast in the classroom seeing significant increases in school breakfast participation?
I'd like to tackle the first half of that question, and then Debbie and others can tackle the second half of that question. And so one of the challenges for some students, and I'm going to begin with low-income students. I tend to look at these issues through the lens of how low-income children and families are impacted. It's just the nature of my work. But oftentimes, low-income students, they deal with the stigma that's attached to having to get to school early and having to go to the cafeteria when no one else is there but them. That can be a challenge. In addition to that, transportation can be a challenge. As Catherine said earlier, there is no post-bell breakfast period that's available to students. And so if a child misses the bus and mom and dad can't get the kid to school before the bell, then the opportunity is lost for that student to have breakfast in the classroom. Then when we're thinking about all students, not just low-income students, the fact of the matter is our lifestyles, meaning the lifestyles of adults, our lifestyles have become increasingly busy. And so a lot of times it's difficult to either serve breakfast at home before it's time to go to school, or to make sure that your child gets to school early enough to have breakfast. So between the stigma, between the transportation challenges, and between just the busyness of life, you have a difficult time sometimes increasing breakfast participation if you don't use an alternative service model. For the second half of the question, I think that Debbie and others have more insight.
I don't have exact numbers, but I have spoken with districts who are doing the breakfast in the classroom or doing the grab and go, and it has increased significantly by double and sometimes triple the number of students who are participating. And a lot of that, again, goes back to eliminating that stigma. Everyone else in the classroom's eating, so they are too, and it becomes more of a classroom time where everybody is eating together versus those few students who are having to go to the cafeteria and maybe participating that way. I don't know if Catherine has any better figures on numbers.
I don't have any specific numbers either. I'm sure some of the directors in the room can talk to their specific numbers. But I think overall, as I said earlier, that we have seen a great increase in breakfast participation over the last 10 years. Some of that due to being alternate ways of doing breakfast. I think the other important thing is that as transportation issues become more and more, as long as breakfast is not an official school part of the school day, we're always going to have that challenge of feeding kids before the bell. So I just want to relay a story to you, and many of you may know the story already about West Virginia. They have last year passed a bill that mandates universal breakfast after the bell in all schools throughout the entire state of West Virginia. And that all came about because one of the legislators visited a school to eat lunch with the kids during school lunch week, and the boy that he was sitting with was packing up his lunch to take home with him. So he was asked by the legislator, "Why are you taking that home?" And he said, "Well, I need to take it home so that my brother can have something to eat later." So that got him very interested in school nutrition and hunger, and became a big advocate, and ended up passing state legislation to have universal breakfast available to all students at no charge, and must be after the school day. And it actually created a bill that became very, very positive in West Virginia. So, you know, that may be something that we can work towards. We have lots of advocates now, so.
And this is a question I think for Mike. So for middle and high schools, what would be some specific points to provide teachers that this in-class program will not become a burden on them? They are feeling overburdened with so many of the demands, and we do not want to add to their stress.
I think one of the keys is to get them involved from the very beginning. I think one of the reasons that teachers feel so overburdened and overstressed in the classroom is a lot of things come to them and say, "You will, you must." And if you don't have buy-in, even if down the road you feel like, okay, this was a good mandate, it's like, oh, Lord, you know, the first reaction is, oh, you're putting something else on me. How am I going to juggle this with everything else I have to do? And the other thing that I didn't mention earlier, that I thought of later, is because as a high school teacher, and I thought, as a high school science teacher, when they have to clean up after themselves in lab, and they're like, oh, we have a janitor to do that. To me, it just would give me another opportunity to teach them that they have to learn to clean up after themselves. But I think it really is involving the teachers at the beginning, getting them involved, expressing to them, the benefits that it'll be to them, especially in middle school and high school, that they're either going to be more awake or they're going to be better behaved.
And I think the other piece of that is to not just think of it as hungry kids and feeding the kids. We need to think of this as an academic program, because we need to teach them at the time they're eating. So whether they incorporate a lesson as part of their SOLs for health, PE, nutrition, math, science, any of it can really integrate. And if we approach educators in the context that this is really to help the children succeed and really be successful, not we just want to feed the kids because we want to do breakfast, I think they'll accept that much more easily than just, I'm going to do breakfast in your classroom and you're going to like it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
I think our last question, unless we have more coming in. So if, we kind of talked about, we all know the importance now of starting these programs, and if there are sort of hiccups along the way. So what would happen if a breakfast in the classroom program fails because of not having the stakeholder support that we have also richly identified as being important? How can you work to restart the momentum to ensure that the program is well received? Anybody have any ideas for that?
Good question. I think it really just goes back to what we said, that you really need to start at the ground level and have the planning team be involved with the planning and involve the teachers and the principal and even the students. We have lots of schools that have done student committees and student advisory groups where they plan the menu for breakfast and convince the teachers that they wanted to do that. So, make it a class project or try it for a week at a time and see if it works that way. But I think the critical thing is to get buy-in from everybody at the very outset.
I would certainly agree with Catherine's comment. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to start big. And Yang, I'm sure, will talk about this a little bit more when she speaks to you in a few minutes. The city of Norfolk is another area that is doing breakfast in the classroom. And they did not start by trying to implement the program in all of the schools. They started with a couple of elementary schools, Yang, is that correct? And now they are expanding. And so to kind of reduce the chance that you'll hit that point of failure, it may make sense to start bit by bit. Of course, we would love for you to offer breakfast in the classroom to all of the schools starting in September of 2014. But the fact of the matter is sometimes it makes sense to move more incrementally, and that's an option available to you.
Let's give our panelists another